In this section of the course, I'm going to walk you through the editing tools within the built-in Photos app and explain how each of them affects your image. Images that are taken with the iPhone's built-in camera are automatically stored in the Photos app, so there's actually no need to import images that are taken with your iPhone into Photos. Images that are airdropped to your iPhone or saved will also appear in the Photos app. Images can be sorted within the Photos app by the date that they were taken within the library section. They can also be sorted into separate albums or by your favorites. Adding images to my favorites is usually how I sort out my top images within Photos. In order to access the editing function within Photos, you first need to open the app, which can be done either from your home screen or from within the built-in camera app. Once you've selected an image, tap Edit in the top right corner to enter the editing workspace. The editing tools appear on the bottom of the screen underneath the image. You can scroll to reveal more tools. Once you select a tool, a slider appears below, which allows you to control the parameter. At the very bottom of the interface, you can toggle between three different editing sections. The one that we're in right now is called Adjust. The next one is the Filters section. And lastly, we have the Crop section. If you're viewing a live photo, you'll have a fourth option here on the far left that's called the Live section. Here you'll be able to scrub through moments recorded and select a new frame to save as your key photo. Just be mindful that if you select a new frame, your photo will actually crop in slightly. Within the editing workspace, you can also undo or redo your most recent edits. This can be done using the arrow icons in the top toolbar on the left. Being able to toggle your edit on and off throughout your editing process is very important to maintaining a natural looking image. If you're looking at an image for too long, your eyes can get used to the way it looks and continue to push the image perhaps further than it needs to go. This can especially be true for tools like contrast and saturation. In Photos, you can simply tap on your image to show the unedited version. After a few seconds, it will bring back your edited version. You can also tap on the icons of the individual parameters to hide certain effects. In general, when editing, it's good practice to edit the copies of your image and always retain an original, unedited version of your photo. If you do this, you have a sense of security knowing that you can always go back to that original photo and do a different edit later on. With Photos, this isn't absolutely necessary because it edits your photos non-destructively by default. Even after saving your image, you can go back into that photo, tap Edit, and adjust each individual parameter or revert the image back to its original form. If you want to save an original version and only work on a copy, this can easily be done within Photos. From your library, you can tap Select in the top right corner, then select one or multiple images. Then you can tap the three dots icon in the bottom right, and then tap Duplicate. This is going to create a copy for each of those images. Now we're going to walk through the first set of tools found in the Adjust section. The first tool that you'll see in the Adjust section is the Auto Enhance tool, which looks like a magic wand icon. By tapping this, you can apply an auto edit to your image. After applying this effect, you can scroll through the individual tools and see exactly what edits the iPhone made and further manipulate them from there. This can be a good place to start your edit, but it will usually need some extra tweaking. The first set of tools that we encounter are part of the exposure correction and dynamic range processes. Within Photos, this manifests in the following tools: exposure, brilliance, highlights, shadows, contrast, brightness, and black point. The exposure tool brightens or darkens your entire image. By dragging the slider to the right, your image gets brighter. By dragging your slider to the left, your image gets darker. This tool has much more of an effect on the highlights of an image. You can see in this example that it doesn't take much for the highlights to lose detail. When using this tool, you should be very mindful of your highlights and make sure that you don't lose detail in those bright elements. I find that this tool is generally better suited for darkening images. Brilliance ultimately adjusts the dynamic range of your image, which can make it appear either more defined and vibrant or make it appear dull. Increasing the brilliance will brighten the shadows and darken the highlights. This can make your image appear more vibrant and your subjects more defined. Decreasing the brilliance will darken the shadows and brighten the highlights. This can make your image appear more dull. The highlights tool adjusts the brightness of just the brighter parts of your image. Dragging your slider to the right will make the highlights brighter. Dragging your slider to the left will make the highlights darker. The shadow tool adjusts the brightness of just the darker parts of your image. Dragging the slider to the right will make the shadows appear brighter, and dragging the slider to the left will make the shadows appear darker. The contrast tool adjusts the ratio between the brightest and darkest parts of your image. Increasing the contrast by dragging the slider to the right will make the highlights appear brighter and the shadows appear darker. Decreasing the contrast or dragging the slider to the left will make the highlights appear darker and the shadows appear brighter. In general, contrast can be a quick fix to make your subjects pop in a dull image. Similarly to the exposure tool, the brightness tool brightens or darkens your entire image, but it does so in a slightly different way. This tool has much more of an effect on the midtones or shadows of an image. So if we increase the brightness here, we can see that our highlights aren't blowing out as quickly as they were when we used the exposure slider. Because of this, I found that this tool excels when brightening an image. The black point tool adjusts the brightness of the very darkest blacks of your image. When increased or dragged to the right, this tool will make the blacks appear darker and more rich. When decreased, this tool will fade the blacks into more gray tones. This tool is most commonly used to decrease and fade the blacks of your image, which can give off more of a filmic look to your photos. The next set of tools are part of the color correction process. Within photos, you have the following tools: saturation and vibrance. Keep in mind that exposure and white balance also play an integral role in the color correction process. The saturation tool adjusts the color intensity of your whole image. When you increase the saturation or drag your slider to the right, you are reducing the gray in your colors and producing closer to pure colors. When you decrease the saturation or drag your slider to the left, you're increasing the gray in your colors, and that's going to result in less color. This tool should especially be used in moderation. Colors that aren't saturated to a natural level will quickly be perceived by the human eye, and this is just going to make your image look unnatural. The vibrance tool adjusts the color contrast and separation between similar colors in a photo. This tool will only target the areas of the image that are less saturated and typically prevents skin tones from becoming oversaturated. For this reason, it's great to use for portraits. The following tools are part of the white balance editing process: warmth and tint. Both of these tools can be used for corrective purposes or to create a certain creative look. The warmth tool globally adjusts your photo to be warmer or cooler. It does so by either adding a yellow or blue color cast. By dragging the slider to the right, you'll introduce a yellow color cast, and by dragging the slider to the left, you'll introduce a blue color cast. The white balance issues that you'll commonly run into can be fixed with this slider. The best way to use a slider is to find a neutral gray or white element in your photo and focus on that portion of the image. You can even zoom into just that area. Adjust the slider until that portion appears neutral and your white balance should look more natural. I'll also commonly push this slider a little past neutral depending on the mood of my image. If I'm working with bright daylight, I'll usually make the image a bit warmer than neutral. And if I'm working with overcast light, I'll typically make the image a bit cooler. This seems to be a little more fitting with the general mood that these different lights give off. The tint tool adds a green or magenta tint to your photo. This is most commonly used as a corrective tool. By dragging the slider to the right, you're going to introduce more magenta color tint, and by dragging to the left, you're going to introduce that green color tint. It's also quite useful in correcting skin tones. Skin tones can often shift along this spectrum, and minor adjustments can bring the skin tones back to a normal hue along the magenta green scale. The following tools are part of the detail editing process. The first tool that we have at our disposal is sharpening. This tool increases the contrast of adjacent pixels, which are typically the edges or more detailed parts of your image. In doing this, it makes the elements in your image appear more defined and sharper. The best practice when using this tool is to zoom into your image and then apply your sharpening tool. Once it starts to look a little too much, you'll notice it, and then you should stop. If you go too far, you're going to notice your image almost looks like it's out of a comic book, or you might even see some haloing around the edges of your subject. I find that iPhones and digital cameras in general are already pretty sharp, so I usually only apply sharpening just a little bit, if at all. The definition tool also increases the detail of your image, but it does so by increasing the contrast in the midtones of your image. By increasing the contrast in just the midtones, you get the effect of more clarity and texture in your image. Again, this tool should be used sparingly because it can quickly give unnatural looking results. The last set of tools that we find in the Adjust section are part of the effects editing process. The noise reduction tool reduces the digital noise that appears when shooting in low light situations or when photos are overly processed. You'll probably need to zoom into your image to tell if there's any digital noise. It's commonly going to appear in the shadows of your image, so if you're looking for it, look for those areas. And then while you're zoomed in, this is a good point to start applying your edits. This is another one that you should apply more subtly because overuse can lead to softer details. This tool works by averaging those pixel values so the noise disappears. There's usually no reason to use this tool unless you have noise in your image. Even with a noisy image, be careful when using this tool because it can soften image detail if overused. The last tool that we have in this section is the vignette tool. If you drag this slider to the right, you'll add a circular black border around your image. And if you drag this slider to the left, you'll add a circular white border to your image. This can be used to focus the viewer's attention on the center of your image. We're now going to move on to the filters section. Once you open the filters section, you'll be able to scroll through the different filters available to you. In the current version of iOS, there are 9 filters available. Scrolling to the right, the first filter that we see is called Vivid. This filter increases the contrast and saturation of your image. The next filter, Vivid Warm, applies the same settings but with a warm color cast. The Vivid Cool filter is again the same as Vivid but with a cool color cast. The next filter is called Dramatic. This one fades the blacks, darkens the highlights, and slightly desaturates the image. The next filter, Dramatic Warm, applies the same edits but with a warm color cast. Similarly, Dramatic Cool applies the same edits but with a cool color cast. The next filter is the first black and white filter. This one is called Mono and simply desaturates the image. The filter after this one is called Silvertone. This one desaturates the image, slightly fades the blacks, and makes the highlights brighter along with slightly tinting the photo yellow. This gives the appearance of an old monochrome film and is easily my personal favorite and most used filter from photos. The last filter, Noir, desaturates the image and increases the contrast for a high contrast black and white look. As I mentioned earlier in this course, the best practice when using filters is to scale the intensity. When you select a filter in Photos, it applies it at 100%, but you can use the slider below the image to scale by a single percent. You can see that by doing this, the filters that originally looked quite extreme now blend into the photo a lot more naturally. The final section of the Photos editing workspace is the crop section. Within the crop section, you have the following cropping tools: cropping, flip, rotate, and aspect ratio. There are also geometry tools, which we will get into in the following slides. In order to crop your image, you can drag the border around your image. By default, it's going to do this freely. If you want to crop uniformly so your aspect ratio stays the same while you crop, you can go into the aspect ratio tool, and from here you can see that freeform mode is selected. If you select any of the other aspect ratios, you'll be able to crop uniformly. Within this section, you can also crop by zooming into your image and dragging your image behind the actual crop frame. This can allow you to be a little more precise and might be more intuitive for you than dragging the frame. Staying in the aspect ratio menu, you can scroll along this bottom toolbar and see all of the different aspect ratios that you can switch between. Your most popular ratios for social media use are square, wallpaper, and 4:5. The icons above your aspect ratio values will change the orientation of your crop between vertical and horizontal. You can see how the aspect ratios change when alternating between these two. Tapping the icon in the top toolbar on the far left will flip your image horizontally. The icon directly to the right of the flip will rotate your image 90 degrees by tapping. At the bottom of the main crop section, there are 3 icons which represent our geometry tools. When using any of these tools, a grid appears over the image, which can help a lot when straightening out lines. The first tool is the Straighten tool, which adjusts the rotation of your image by a single degree up to 45 degrees in either direction. You can see how dragging this slider will rotate the image one way or another. This tool is great for straightening out your horizon. The second tool adjusts the vertical angle of an image. By dragging to the right, you're going to stretch out the bottom of the image, and by dragging to the left, you're going to stretch out the top of the image. And the last tool adjusts the horizontal angle. By dragging to the right, you're going to stretch the right side of the image, and by dragging to the left, you're going to stretch the left side of the image. Saving is quite simple in Photos and can be done from within any of the editing sections. Simply tap Done in the bottom right corner to save your edits. If you don't want to save your edits, you can click Cancel in the bottom left corner and select Discard Changes in the pop-up menu. That concludes this section on the editing tools within Photos. Again, this section was meant to serve more as a guide into how to navigate the editing workspace in Photos and an explanation into what each tool does to your photo. For more on the best practices of editing, stay tuned for sections 7 and 8 of this course. In the next section of this course, we're going to go over the interface and tools within Lightroom Mobile.